everyone, and thank you for joining me today in the first of two presentations in the series Applying for Permanent Residency in Canada, hosted by HIPC in Newcomer Week. My name is Haley Cuthbertson, and I'm a master's candidate at Ryerson University in their Immigration and Settlement Studies program. I'm also a student doing a placement with HIPC, and that's how I got the opportunity to make this video for you. So, this first segment that we're going to talk about today is a brief overview about how permanent residents fit into the Canadian immigration system. I really created this to help anyone who's struggling to understand the complexity of Canada's immigration system, which at times is all of us, and for those who are just enthusiastic about the subject. So in creating these sessions, I do want to give a heads up that I elected to use the terminology that you're going to find on the IRCC website and on immigration applications and in the legislation. I decided to do this so then that way you can draw parallels between this presentation and any research you're doing on your own later. So I'm going to do my best to explain the terminology as we go along, but don't forget your pen and paper in case you want to jot down any notes and look something else up later. So I want to begin by talking briefly through what you guys can expect in this first session. So first, I'm going to take a moment to discuss the more general objective of these two sessions. Then after that, we're going to explore the basics of the Canadian immigration system and where individuals with different status fit within it. We're going to then move along to discussing permanent residency and how it compares to Canadian citizenship. And then we're going to conclude with the three main classifications of permanent residency in Canada that you can apply to come over under. So as I said, the objective of these two sessions is really to serve as an educational workshop to help provide knowledge about Canada's immigration system in the process of applying for permanent residency. Though I do want to say that this isn't intended to be specific advice on any individual case. Immigration can be a complex subject, so if you do need assistance on your applications, please contact an immigration professional. So the first question we really want to ask ourselves when talking about immigration is who's in charge of it all? So simply put, immigration in Canada, it's federally regulated, meaning that the government out of Ottawa makes all the big decisions. So the Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship Canada, also known as IRCC, and how you'll see it throughout these presentations, is the department that deals with immigration. It facilitates the arrival of immigrants, it provides protection to refugees, and it offers programming to help newcomers settle in Canada. In addition to these tasks, it also grants citizenship and issues travel documents such as passports to Canadians. Currently, the Honourable Marco E.L. Mendicino is the Minister of Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship Canada, representing the Liberal government. So in this presentation, we're going to talk about three classifications of individuals in Canada because they have to do directly with what we're going to talk about. So first, we're going to talk about foreign nationals, who are also commonly known as temporary residents. We're going to talk about citizens, and then we're also going to talk about permanent residents. So who are foreign nationals? So as I mentioned before, foreign nationals are individuals who are also known as temporary residents. So these can be anybody from international students to temporary foreign workers. What defines a foreign national is that the individual possesses an approved application to either work, study, or live in Canada for a limited period of time. So the big difference here is that at the end of their visa, a foreign national is expected to return to their country. So citizens, how does one become a citizen? So a person becomes a citizen by either being born in Canada, by being born outside of Canada to Canadian parents, or through a process called naturalization, which means that they've lived in Canada as a permanent resident for a minimum of 3 years and have successfully applied to attain citizenship. Obtaining citizenship is beneficial because it guarantees an individual certain rights. Rights such as citizens have an unqualified right to enter and remain in Canada. So what this means is that under no circumstances can a Canadian citizen not be permitted back into Canada or be forced out. Additionally, if someone has achieved citizenship by birth, it can't be taken away. So citizenship by naturalization, like we talked about before, can only be taken away if there was a fraud in the application process. So that's really why we want to focus on application processes in the second session of this segment, because if you make a mistake on your application process, it can really come back to haunt you later on. This finally brings us to permanent residence, which is really what we're here to talk about today. So who are permanent residents and how do you obtain permanent residency? So permanent residents are individuals who've applied successfully to come to Canada permanently. So generally, individuals who apply for permanent residency have done it from outside of Canada. However, there are a few exceptions where you can apply from inside. So just some facts about permanent residency is that when an individual's application for permanent residency is approved by the IRCC, they're entitled to a variety of rights that are similar to those of citizens. So for example, permanent residents have a qualified right to enter, remain, work, and study in Canada. So very similar to citizens. A permanent resident can apply for citizenship through what we said is naturalization after being here for a minimum of 3 years. And a permanent resident cannot lose their status unless they've been found to be inadmissible before becoming a citizen. So once again, tune into that second session of this presentation because we're going to talk about admissibility and we're going to make sure that we understand exactly what it means when it comes to being a permanent resident. So what is the difference between permanent residency and citizenship? So they both come with rights. However, citizens tend to have more rights than permanent residents. So for example, permanent residents cannot run for political office or vote. They're not able to work in security-sensitive positions or join the military, and they can have status taken away if they're found to be inadmissible. So like we discussed before. So different classes of permanent residency applications. So there are 3 classes of applications for permanent residency, and we're going to discuss them here. So the first is the family class. So family class applicants are ones that are sponsored by a relative who's already a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident. The next class is refugee or person in need of protection. So refugees are individuals fleeing persecution, and a protected person is someone who's at risk of death, torture, or other cruel and unusual punishment. Economic class immigrants are ones that are coming based on skills and resources that will enable them to contribute to the Canadian economy. So let's discuss these more in depth. So family class. If you're sponsored by a relative who's already a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident, you can live, study, and work in Canada if your application is approved. Additionally, if you sponsor certain other relatives down to Canada, if you're at least 18 years old and a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident of Canada. So you yourself can then sponsor somebody to come here. A refugee or protected person. So this is the second classification of applications for permanent residency accepted by the Canadian government. And it's a little bit more complex than the family class that we talked about before. So a refugee in Canada needs to meet the definition of a convention refugee as set forth by the United Nations in the Refugee Convention. So an individual applying for refugee status could be excluded from the protection for a variety of reasons. So such reasons could be things like they obtained protection locally and then they decided to apply in Canada, or more serious infractions such as committing a war crime, a crime against humanity, or a serious non-political crime. Additionally, an individual applying for permanent residency as a refugee must have a situation that fits the definition of convention refugee. So, for example, they need to be residing outside of their home country, they have to have a well-founded fear of persecution, and they need to be seeking refuge based on one of the convention grounds. So the convention grounds can be anything from race, religion, nationality, membership in a social group, or having a political opinion. In addition to refugees, Canada will also offer protection to people who do not meet the definition of convention refugee, but who are in need of protection because they are fleeing a personal risk of torture, death, or other cruel and unusual treatment or punishment. So these are the protected persons that we talked about before. So this finally brings us to the economic class. So individuals who apply for an economic class have skills and resources that will enable them to contribute to the Canadian society. Arguably, this is one of the more complex classes in the Canadian immigration system because it's largely based on our labor market and continuously changes. So I've listed here a couple of the foundational classes that Canada has instituted over the past decades. However, I do want to note that with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, a variety of new streams have opened up. So I want to encourage people to be sure to check the IRCC's website to keep up to date on any new streams that have opened up in the last couple of months. So coming back to these foundational classes, we see that economic class has been broken down into 3 categories: skilled immigrants, business class, and caregiver class. So skilled immigrants can apply to come under streams such as the Federal Skilled Worker, the Federal Skilled Trades, the Canada Experience Class, and the Provincial Nominee Program. Individuals applying through the business class can apply through streams such as startup visas and self-employed. And then people in the caregiver class are essentially coming over to help take care of somebody within Canada's society. So based on your eligibility, you would decide which class best fits your circumstance and fill out your application accordingly. So this brings us to the end of this presentation, and I want to thank you for joining me in the first of 2 sessions today. I really hope the information that you learned here has better helped you understand the Canadian immigration system and how permanent residents fit into it. Keep your eyes open for the second session of this workshop on HPC's Newcomer Week event page, because the sequel will be talking about applying for permanent residency and providing some guidance and resources about how to create your applications. So thanks again for tuning in and enjoy the rest of Newcomer Week.